Hey girl gang, hey super mamas, it's Dr. Joy here and you are watching Delivering Joy MDTV. Welcome. We are doing a combined Well Woman Wednesday and Super Mama Sunday, and we are continuing our talk on the rebirth of joy, reclaiming reproductive health and rights for Black birthers. Y'all, I have a phenomenal guest tonight and she is here to talk to us about Black maternal mental health and about mental health for the family. She is a renowned speaker on this subject and has been leading the charge in the Postpartum Support International Georgia chapter over the past year and has been a board member for almost 3 years. So we have a totally qualified sister to talk to us about this tonight, and you don't want to miss a minute of this episode, so make sure you keep watching. All right, we are back. I want to introduce you to Keisha Reeves, who is a licensed professional counselor, and she's certified in perinatal mental health and has a wonderful practice where she talks to families who are going through perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. And I say families because it's not just moms, but also partners who can experience this. So I am so excited to have you, Keisha. Welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Joy. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
You have a wonderful initiative called Push Thru Mom. So tell me a little bit about how you came to the mental health space for moms and families.
Absolutely. Well, I'm a Georgia native. Both of my parents worked for, if anyone's ever heard of this, Central State Hospital that's in Milledgeville, Georgia. So it's a psychiatric hospital. So mental health was always something that was a great discussion in our household. And I always knew that I wanted to be a therapist or a psychologist or a psychiatrist, just in the realm. So once I started my private practice in 2015 or 2014, I think, I started getting a lot of women who were having symptoms of perinatal mood and anxiety disorders, but didn't know what to call it, didn't have like a clear plan of how to transition into motherhood. And that's what prompted me to get certified in perinatal mood and anxiety disorders through Postpartum Support International. And then after I had my own son, my first child in 2017, I experienced my own postpartum depression and postpartum anxiety. And I knew if I was someone who was clinically trained and knowledgeable and was having a difficult time, I couldn't imagine what it must be like for someone who had no clinical background at all or access to care or help or adequate resources. And that really empowered me to do the work, do the research, and to expand and open my group practice, bring on more clinicians, all trained in maternal mental health. So we work with women who are trying to conceive, dealing with infertility, IVF, surrogacy adoption, stillbirth, infant loss, as well as perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. And it's been a passion of mine, which is why I joined the board for PSI Georgia, and being able to facilitate training throughout the state of Georgia, as well as facilitating the Mocha Mom support group at Atlanta Birth Center. And I realized that although Atlanta sometimes can feel like Wakanda, and we feel, like we have some resources and support, we still have a lot of ways to go. And that's just Metro Atlanta. Rural Georgia, it has a huge deficit and a lot of work to be done and a lot of moms that need more support. But that's a little bit of why I'm so passionate about it.
Well, I mean, it has been just such a pleasure to watch you work over the years, and having come to some of your summits and seeing how you really embrace that whole, hey, mental health has to be part of our overall health. Mental health is so important in the maternal child health space and also in the Black family health space. I think I remember coming to Push Thru Moms one year to do a panel discussion, and your husband was there and he was talking about this, and I was like, yes, I love this whole family dynamic. So I think that you guys do such great work. And when we've been talking about some of the historical context about Black birth in the United States. And one thing that I've been waiting to get to is the mental health repercussions of being enslaved and not owning yourself, not owning your children, not owning your experience in your body. How do you think that trauma, because that is trauma at the probably at the highest level, how do you think that trauma has affected Black birthers in the United States?
Hugely. Intergenerational trauma is a thing. There is a Grady Trauma Project study where they talk about toxic stress and intergenerational trauma and how trauma is passed or down intergenerationally. Not only that, it impacts the attachment and bonding style of parents. You can see how sometimes Black parents can have an anxious attachment style or even an authoritative attachment style out of what they've experienced in the trauma. And then even when you go back as far as like the lack of trust in the medical system, of how the pioneer of OBGYN or gynecology, Dr. Sims, and how he was once practicing on his slaves without any type of consent for treatment at that time, using no numbing methods or anesthesia. And even when we hear about the Tuskegee Project or Henrietta Lacks, it's something that's very common. And so with the lack of trust, oftentimes Black birthing parents or Black families may not speak up or may not feel as if it's safe or they will be heard. I was working with someone once that felt like they needed to be on medication, but wasn't sure, but didn't feel comfortable talking about it with their doctor because they didn't want to just be thrown medication or didn't feel like they would be heard. And it's something that's culturally, and especially something that I've seen being someone raised in the South and what the stigma looks like of you not having it together, or the strong Black woman syndrome, feeling as if you should just be able to just grin and bear it and just deal with it and don't give yourself the time, or that you're looked at as weak if you actually create space to feel your feelings or express the difficulties. And it has a huge impact throughout the years. And there's this Toni Morrison quote that I always speak about that I love. And she talks about how now being a Black birthing parent or Black mother, how there's so much freedom in it now because we actually get to be parents. And when you look at our ancestors of slaves, how they didn't have that ability, how they would birth these children, but how they were just farm equipment that would be sold, and the difficulty of layered trauma in which that would have produced for them, and how we're still kind of dealing with the repercussions of that even today.
Wow. That gives me chills to hear that. Like, thinking about the level of trauma, because we all know when a baby is born, there is such an intense bond usually that forms between that mom and that baby. And if you try to go and take that baby from that mom, what shows up is usually something that you are not prepared for, right? And I think that knowing that these folks had to let go of that, um, and to be able to detach themselves in such a way that if that baby was taken from your arms and sold or sent to another plantation to be hired out or whatever, you had to be okay with that, not flinch and not fight in order to preserve your own life and the lives of your husband or your family or your children. So I think that that's something that definitely has to weigh on. And you talked a little bit about attachment, and we talked about that in the first episode with Liz Liba, and we talked about how that may be kind of affecting some of the attachment today. Like, you don't want your child to be spoiled, or felt you don't want to feel like your child is getting too much attention. What do you think about how that attachment has formed?
I definitely, there's a saying of don't hold the baby too long. You'll spoil them. That can be cultural. But also not only with that, like when I was talking about anxious attachment, even personal experience of when I gave birth to my second in 2020, I gave birth to him in April, immediately after George Floyd was murdered, Breonna Taylor was murdered, Aubrey was murdered. And immediately that anxiousness can overshadow the joy of being present with your baby, because you have this responsibility of having brought this Black infant, this innocent child into this world, and now you feel like you have to equip them on how to survive and how to navigate, and you as a parent of how you are protecting them. And it's a unique experience to Black birthing parents, something that our counterparts don't have to deal with, but it can create an anxious attachment for sure.
And can you describe a little bit more about like how an anxious attachment might present?
Oftentimes when it's having this underlining fear, and with that fear, you may come off as more harsher, trying to equip them for a reality that may not be their reality today. If we've ever heard, you have to work twice as harder than the others, or no one's going to give you any type of breaks out there. It doesn't matter about your color on paper, it's about your color that's in person. And instilling that in your child, or being hard on them because you feel like the world isn't going to give them any breaks, so that you have to be a harsher parent in the household. And underneath that is fear. You're very fearful of anything happening to them. You're scared. And so you can come off as hard or detached, because it's from a source of fear and being scared of what the world and how they may show up for this innocent child that you brought into the world.
Wow. That, I think we see that quite a bit. We see that quite a bit. And then, another thing, when we talk about parenting and about how parents might discipline, I think that is another huge thing that we see a lot of in the Black community, is parents not being able to separate their fear from their anger. Would you comment on that?
Absolutely. There's different parenting styles that has evolved, especially in like the millennial generation, something called like gentle parenting. And often I'll hear clients will talk about that they don't want to parent how their parents parented. They don't want to be as harsh. They want to give space for their children to express their emotions. They want to have a conversation with them. And sometimes that conflict is when generations aren't on the same page, where the older generation can feel like, spare the rod, spoil the child, and as if they're going to make a more sensitive child that's not going to be prepared for the world. But I definitely see the pivot. And it's great that we have different parenting styles as options, versus it just being straight authoritative and leaving no room for you to be able to have a bond where it's an emotional bond, physical bond, where you can talk to your child, you can hear them out, and you can be a guide for them while they're here on earth, and not someone who is ordering them or ruling them because it's out of place of fear.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think that probably comes out of that anxious attachment that you were just describing, where you're afraid that, if I don't train my child to obey authority, something bad will happen to them. If I don't teach them to just smile and say yes sir to police officers, then they may end up murdered. If I don't teach them to acquiesce to an unjust work environment, then they might not be able to be financially solvent, like that sort of thing. And I think that that's not necessarily the message that we want to send, but it was the message that we survived with. And now we want to talk about not just where we are now, because I think we're somewhere in between. There was this enslavement and Jim Crow and civil rights movement. And now we've got some more freedoms, but we are now realizing, after the deaths of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and so many countless others. I visited the wall, the I guess it's the fence at Capitol Hill, and actually saw the photos and the tributes to all the Black men and women who have been murdered in the United States by folks who supposedly were to be protecting and serving. And I just, wow, that was amazing to see that. I couldn't believe it. But when we think about that and the way that our parents taught us and the way that our parents were fearful about how we moved around in space, I can understand it so much better now. I'm going to tell you what to do because I want to make sure that you're safe. You are my investment and I want to protect my investment. When we hear that now, it makes more sense to us as an adult than it did to us as children and teenagers. But the biggest crux of this conversation, the real meat here is, how do we start to move past all this? Like, how do we start to think about parenting in the future? How do we start to think about our mental health in the future as Black birthers and Black families, so that we can start to change that narrative that's running in our own heads? Nevertheless, the narrative that's running in the heads of other ethnicities, but what's playing in our own minds? How can we do that?
I've seen in my practice an increase in Black birthing parents having antepartum anxiety. And that coming from of being a parent of a Black child, or worrying about their own life when they give birth, if they'll be able to survive birth, if them and their baby will be able to come home, and seeing all of the statistics, hearing all of the stories, and also recognizing that it doesn't matter your socioeconomic status. Listening to Serena Williams, someone who's internationally known, talk about how she had to, break down and beg to be heard in order to live, really strikes people who are just ordinary folks, wanting to expand their family. And I always like to equip them or tell them that the statistics does not have to define your faith, that it's good to be informed and to be knowledgeable of what's going on. But the best thing that you can do is equip yourself with all of the tools, the resources, the support, and the team. And as much as a plan, even though the plan doesn't always go as planned, but as much as a plan as possible so that you can have the experience. And most importantly, to try to be present for it. Because just because we have this unfair advantage that is at no fault of ours, is from a long history of racism and discrimination, it does not mean that you have to take the joy from this experience and you can't be present in it, and you can't, really like embrace it and feel it and be happy. This is your joyful, something that you created that is a blessing. And so with that plan, it's, what does your supports look like? How can your supports advocate for you? What does your medical team look like? Do you feel like you trust them? Do you feel uncomfortable? Do you feel heard? If you don't, you have the power to switch and change and find someone else at any time, even in the hospital. And what is your postpartum plan? Who do you want to show up for you? What do you want your labor and delivery to look like? What is a secondary plan to that? So they don't feel like I am completely entrusting my entire life and fate to this person that I don't really feel like they spend any time with me or hear me. And I'm just going to pray that it will all work out. That will create some anxiety. But let's look at some things that you feel like you have that are within your control, so that you can feel as if you are a participant of this and you can have some happiness out of this experience.
Yes, and that is the key. And that is what the rebirth of joy is all about. It is about reclaiming that for ourselves, reclaiming that joy, that anticipation, that connection to the family, that excitement about the new life that's coming earthside. We have to figure out a way to get back to that versus being stuck in the fear and anxiety of, okay, now I have to go in for this birth. I'm not sure how I feel about my team. I don't know if they're going to be there for me. And one of the things that I really love about being able to be a birth keeper, a birth care provider, is to be able to go in and say, I see you and I hear you and I'm here for you and I'm going to be here and I'm going to make sure that even if I can't make your birth plan turn out exactly the way you want it, that at least you're going to be heard, you're going to be respected, you're going to be, warmly treated. So I think that is such a huge issue for moms. And I was telling someone the other day, we've done such a great job of putting it out there that, hey, you're in danger, 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 danger. And the statistics are this, and these are all the bad things that can happen to you. But we haven't really done such a great job arming moms with knowledge and family members with knowledge so that they can go in and show up and be advocates in that space. And I don't really expect a mom who's birthing to be her own advocate. She really needs to focus on bringing that baby earthside. But there are other people that we can teach to be advocates in that space and to show up and be seen and say, hey, I think that she's saying that she needs this. I think that she really would benefit from that. And I think the part that you really touched on an important topic earlier was that we have this kind of authoritative idea about what we're supposed to do when we show up in hospitals and doctors' offices. How do you talk to clients about how to kind of dysregulate that? Like how to turn that noise in their head down so that they can show up and say what their real needs are in their prenatal space, in their birthing space, in the postpartum space?
I always like to encourage them to think of it as this is a collaborative partnership. You shouldn't feel as if you should be subjected to whatever someone tells you what you need to do to your body. Even for myself, like I know my body, but I don't know where my organs are necessarily or what to do with them or how to stop hemorrhaging. But I would collaborate with my provider so I can share with them what I'm experiencing, what I'm feeling, what my symptoms are. They can hear me, like you said, and then we can work together to remedy the issue. So being able to reframe it for them as a partnership so that they don't feel as if they should just do whatever or they should just concede. And with that partnership, with any partner that you choose, picking one that you feel like you can trust, picking one that you feel like you are heard from. Not being with someone that you feel like you have to be silent, someone that you feel like rushes you, someone who doesn't hear you or dismisses what you're saying that you're experiencing. Just like with a romantic partner or a family member or a friend, if they make you feel that way, you would excommunicate them out of your life. Do the same with your provider. If anything, with your provider is priority because they are collaborating with you with your body. And this is your life. And you want to feel safe with someone in regards to your life and helping them feel confident in that decision and reframing it in that way. When we talk about even like with Black men not going to the doctor or Black women not going to the doctor to get their mammograms or getting their pap smears, not feeling safe or comfortable. And these are things that are essential for your life and dismantling it. It's okay for you to go and find out what's going on with your body. Just choose a provider that you feel safe and comfortable with.
I totally agree, like snaps, because I have been talking about that, about how the relationship between you and your birth worker or birth workers, your team of birth workers, is a true relationship. It's a very sacred one. And just like you said, if it was a romantic relationship, you would not put up with that. Right? So if you're in a situation where you don't feel heard, where you feel disrespected, you feel like you cannot trust this individual with your life, you should not. And I say that even for patients who come to see me. If you're a member of my girl gang, if you feel like you can't trust me, run. Okay? Run far and run fast. Find someone that you feel comfortable with, someone that you can at least have a conversation with. And I realize I'm in a more rural area, and so it can be harder to find people that can see you or take care of you. But at the very least, raise that conversation, lift those thoughts and say, hey, I really would like to have a conversation with you. I want to take some time. Ask for extra time when you go to an office and say, hey, I want to book at least 30 minutes. I need to talk to this person. I have some questions. I have some concerns I need to have answered before I leave. Can I book, 30 minutes instead of the regular 15-minute OB appointment? And I think that's very respectful of that provider's time. And when they see that, they're like, oh, this person really must need to talk to me about something. And can take the time to sit down, take a deep breath, and listen deeply, so that they can understand what your concerns are. And if you can't leave that conversation feeling like you two are on the same page or that you're on the same page with that team, then it might be time to find another place where you can thrive, is how I like to put it.
I totally agree. I was saying how with any client, having your ideals of how you would like your appointments to go or your checkups to go. And it's okay to have this framework or these questions or to request this. I'll even have clients sometimes that will be at home and will be worried about a symptom. Like, I don't know if I should be leaking this much. I'm worried that it's amniotic fluid leaking and I'm very anxious, but I don't want to call a doctor. What if they're very busy or they get annoyed? If they get annoyed, then maybe they're not the right provider for you. If they won't say, yeah, come on in, let's check you out, let's see what's going on, then perhaps it's time for you to pick somebody else. It's okay for you to have these asks, and it's even more okay for you to have a provider that can listen to those asks.
Absolutely. I get messages and calls all day, every day. I'm concerned about this. I'm worried about that. And I always say, as a provider, you can't do everything for everybody all the time. And I'm sure you know that, Keisha, because you have so many clients. I mean, I know like at one point there was like a waiting list to get into your practice, but I can't say, hey, if you're worried that you might have a UTI, come in and leave us a urine. If you're worried that you may have an infection, come in and let's get a swab. Like, there are quick things that we can do to just kind of allay concerns. Oh, come in and get some labs. And we can do that without having to give up a whole lot of the clinic day and just say, hey, if you're concerned, I'm concerned. And I think that's what really does the most for that person is if you say, if you're concerned, I'm concerned. If I can't get you into the office, here's where you need to go so they can see you urgently and take care of what your concern is. And that's really the important thing that you need from someone that you can trust, is to know that they have your back. And if you can't reach them, then whatever your delivery hospital is or your point of entry is into the hospital system, then you go there and you say, hey, I've been having this concern. I tried to reach my doctor's office. I wasn't able to. I just want to make sure I'm not leaking amniotic fluid or that I don't have a bad infection that could cause me to have preterm birth or something like that. And that's totally okay. And so as we get ready to wrap this conversation up, I want to ask you about your thoughts in terms of specifically Black maternal mental health. And I know that one of your passions has been to make specific programming for Black maternal mental health. And I know that we're just coming off the high of the Black Maternal Mental Health Summit. Why was that a passion point for you? And how did you feel about making this an annual summit, and how has that helped your clients or the people in your community?
Like you said, I like things all Black maternal mental health. I think the more programming we have, the more seminars, workshops, summit, just all of the avenues in which one could obtain information does so much for our community, with just being educated, learning about resources, learning that they're not alone. At one of the seminars that I taught this year, someone said that they thought postpartum depression was just for white women, because when they would hear about it on television and the news, they would only be talking about white women. And that same woman said that what she experienced was, now that she knows, is postpartum anxiety, but she never heard of anyone talk about postpartum anxiety. So she felt like something was wrong with her. So she just sat with those symptoms and never talked about it with anybody. So the more that we have conferences, workshops, even this, people can learn more and feel like they're not alone. There's nothing wrong with them. You are not weak. It doesn't mean that you're inadequate. It doesn't mean that you're a good mother. And if anything, we have a lot of, because something that people don't often think about when they hear postpartum depression or postpartum anxiety is that although there can be hormonal factors or chemical imbalances, but a huge piece of it is risk factors. What's going on in your environment? If there's a lot of racism, social injustice, and if you have issues with your relationship, if you have a complicated birth, if your baby went to the NICU, if you couldn't get as much time off, all of those ingredients combined, compiling on top of each other, can cause anybody to be anxious or sad or, just deal with whatever type of stressors. And it's understandable and it's treatable, and there's evidence-based approaches to it. And 1 in 3 Black women experiences a perinatal mood and anxiety disorder. That's how common it is. It doesn't mean that it will be you, but that means that there are tons of providers, certified perinatal mental health providers, support groups, holistic practices, just tons of different things that you can participate in to decrease your risk or to just improve your symptoms. And also with all of these different platforms of just learning how to prioritize yourself as a Black woman or Black birthing parent. Because oftentimes we can just like pour in, give, and put ourselves on the back burner and not give space for the emotions or the symptoms that we're experiencing. When we think about our ancestors, we didn't hear our great grandmother say, Sundays are for meditation. I'm going to be in the garden journaling. That was not historically what we did or what we heard. They were trying to cook, clean, take care of these kids, have these bills paid. And I'm sure they were stressed as caretakers. Whereas now we're in a different age where we have yoga and we have apps where we learn how to ground ourselves. And it's so important to take advantage of that. So that you can be the best version of yourself, so that you can show up and be the version of yourself to the people that you love. And in doing that, like in participating in events like this and reading this and viewing everything that you're creating, it's helping with that statistic, and it's helping break down that stigma that's associated with Black maternal mental health.
Yes, I so appreciate the comments and the insights that you just gave us because, even in my smaller practice before I even came here, in a smaller town, we did just a study. We just wanted to know how many of our patients were screening positive for anxiety or depression during or after pregnancy. And we found that quite a few were, many more than what we expected to find, more than what is reported as the national average. And that may have had something to do with the fact that we were a more rural practice. But what we found was that Black women were actually the most likely, they were the highest percentile in terms of the positive screenings that we had, but they were the least likely to accept medication or therapy. And I think that a lot of that is cultural. As we wrap up here, what advice do you have for the Black birthing person or even the non-birthing parent when it comes to seeking therapy to reframe your mind to move us forward into the next generation?
You and I have talked about this because we've even talked about how your procedures are within your own group. But in a perfect world, I feel as if mental health providers would be in OBGYN practices or in midwife practices, or even like when someone seeks to give birth at home. And when you get those dates of when you have your anatomy scan, when you have your glucose test, you also have those dates of when you see your therapist. And so when you get your screening at your second trimester, third trimester, 6-week, you won't feel, if you have a high screening, as if something is wrong with you and you have to go see a therapist, because you would have been seeing a mental health therapist all along. And it would have just been something that's just a run of the mill, checking in. Oh, we see that you screened a little high. I'm glad that we saw that. Let's talk about some coping skills and look at your support so we can support you through the process. Then it won't feel so stigmatized, and it doesn't feel like, well, what's wrong with you? You scored a 20. You need to go see somebody. And I also feel as if we change our thoughts around seeing a therapist as it being a bad thing, but looking at it as a form of self-care, just as you would go see your 6-week OBGYN appointment, so that you can make sure that your vagina has healed or your cesarean has healed adequately. We want to make sure that mentally you are healing just as well also. And looking at it from a broader stance of, you just brought a human into this world. That's a lot. And it takes a minute for your brain to process that. And if you're breastfeeding and if there's complications with that, or If you have lack of sleep, sleep deprivation is a huge trigger for anyone's mental health. However your finances are, however work is, however your supports are, what it's doing to your relationship, it would make sense that you just want an unbiased person just to talk about all of that with, just to process it with, and figure out a plan to better support you so that you can just cope during this adjustment period, even if you already had other kids. Because throwing in another child, that's a whole nother thing, that can be an adjustment. And it's okay, because the whole time span from when you were pregnant up until 1 year postpartum, and your entire body and your life and your mental health has gone through a change. And so just to be able to check in with someone just to see how you're doing with all of those changes.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for that. That is probably going to win me so many points with patients. Just that answer to that question alone. But I think that it's vitally important that we start to normalize mental health in the maternal health space. And I remember us having that chat, and we are still working on it. As a matter of fact, we just got the go ahead to integrate mental health into our OB practice. So I'm super excited about that. So check back with me in May, and I'll have some updates. But I hope that you have learned a lot, just like I have, and we are moving forward past the pain, past all of the things that we've had to survive, to move back to reclaim our reproductive health and rights and our sovereignty over our own body so that we can have a rebirth of joy. If you are watching us on YouTube, click down on that description box to find information on how you can connect with Keisha Reeves at her website and how you can join her Push Thru Mom's initiative. And they've got some great activities that they do every single year. And then if you're watching us on BTV, head on over to the YouTube channel so you can get that info. We'll see you next time, girl gang and super mamas. Peace.